Good to go. So, how did the dough turn out, Gary?
Okay, so taking the towel off there, and I swish that around, and I can actually hear some little bubbles in there because it's all a lot of yeast have multiplied and are ready to do their job. So, what we do this morning about 7? So it's about 4 in the afternoon. So it's been a good portion of the day. So we have our starter. So I'm going to add a few things that we didn't add before. I'm going to do about a teaspoon of salt, pinch of salt here. And for flavoring, I'm going to do a little bit of garlic powder and a little bit of onion powder. You don't have to do any of these, but it gives the crust a nice taste. And then I've got some Italian seasoning, which is like a blend of, oregano and basil and marjoram and all that stuff. So a little pinch of that. And so that was salt, garlic, onion, Italian seasoning, and now I'm going to do about a 1/4 cup of olive oil. Okay, so this is a part that isn't exact, and that is the amount of flour. It's going to vary on the humidity in your house, how your flour was stored, the grind of the flour, all kinds of things. So we can just watch and see what I do. I've got a 1/2 cup measurer. We're not really measuring, we're just using it as a scoop. And where'd my spoon go? And we're gonna just stir that around. Basically, what I'm trying to do with the spoon is get to the point where I get my hands in here to knead it without a horribly messy, gooey mess. So we're just adding about a 1/2 cup at a time till we get to that point. If you're keeping track, we're into it about a cup. Okay, so you get to the point where it's making a ball in there, and getting to the point where I'm going to be able to take over with my hands and not make a mess. So I'm going to throw a little bit of flour on my counter here, clean counter. Do you need me to point it down, Jeff?
Maybe just a little bit. It'll look a lot better. Perfect.
How's that?
Good.
Okay.
Very good.
All right. So, and something I do, as soon as I empty this bowl, I'm going to take it over to the sink and fill it with hot water, and you'll see why in a minute. I'm going to let that slowly fill over there. Okay, so now we're starting the kneading process, and I always just kind of give myself a note of the time because I like to knead the dough about 10 minutes. I've got 4:06 West Coast time here, and hopefully you can see here. You got to be a little gentle. If you've never worked with dough, you got to be a little gentle at first so you're not getting too much into the wet part. And what I do at this point is I get a scoop of flour and I just keep that handy here, and I keep flouring my work surface. As you can see, we're not working with such a big dough that you need both hands. Usually you can do it with one hand, but I'm just pushing and spreading and pushing and spreading. It's kind of a feel you get when you're doing it. And you just keep flouring your work surface so you're not getting the dough to stick to the work surface or to your hands. A lot of people get freaked out in the beginning of making dough. Oh, it's sticking to everything. Just add some more flour to your hands. And in the beginning, you don't have to worry about over flouring it. I'm looking over here. My bowl's over there filled with hot water. And why I'm doing that is because when we're done here kneading, we're gonna clean that bowl out and put a little oil in there, and it'll be nice and warm to help the dough raise, because I'm letting that hot water sit in there. Okay, and from here, you're just kind of feeling what the dough is doing. When it's too wet, you got a little more flour. When it's too dry, you just work it some more. Just keep spreading your dough around. There's something called a bench knife. It's just a flat, straight edge, and that's mainly for scraping your surface. I'm just working on my kitchen countertop, Formica countertop, but it's good to scrape it once in a while to get the little dough particles up. That way your wife doesn't get mad at you for leaving a mess. And if I was doing this on a normal Sunday afternoon, I'd probably be listening to some afternoon NPR show about a TED Talk or something. But instead, we're talking to Jeff, which is just as good. And you're basically, if you can err on the side of wet as opposed to over dry, your dough will turn out better. But because we're doing it by hand and not in a mixer, we've got to be a little aware of our moisture content, because yeah, we don't want some gooey mess all over our hands, but at the same time, we don't want to add so much flour that it becomes too dry. So you saw I added a 1/4 cup of oil in there. That's going to give the dough some moisture. And as long as I can be a little light with my hands and not too heavy, it'll work out. Pretend you are a mixer. What you're doing here, when you're doing this with the dough, you're developing gluten in the dough. That's going to allow it to rise and have, air bubbles in it. And that's why we use wheat flour as opposed to some of the other flours that are low in gluten. Because gluten is what makes the strands in the dough that allow it to rise. If you used, let's say, cornmeal, corn doesn't have any gluten. It's not going to rise that way. And the flour I'm using today is King Arthur all-purpose white flour. I normally, like I said earlier, I like to support some local flour mills here in town, Fairhaven Flour Mill, but with the COVID virus going on, they were all out of flour, and you have to get what you get. So King Arthur is a good flour company. Sound like I'm plugging their product, but they make a wonderful cookbook, King Arthur Flour Cookbook, all kinds of good recipes in there. And I'm lucky, they have 2 baking schools in this country, one in Vermont and one in Mount Vernon, Washington, which is just 30 minutes south of here. So if you're ever out here, you can go down there and take one of their mini courses on how to bake.
This might be good. You guys doing okay with supplies through all this corona?
Pretty much. I mean, sometimes I go to the store and there's lacking in something, but we've been able to get by. How about you guys?
Yeah, same thing. I'm good, though.
So you, like I said, if you're doing a big batch of dough, like you were making several loaves of bread, we'd be getting into this with both hands. But being that it's just one pizza, by the way, you might be wondering our ratios here. This makes, if you see what I'm doing, I'm scratching some flour into the surface there because it was getting a little wet. This usually makes one nice, I don't know, I don't measure it, but pizza about yay big. If you've got extra dough, I like a thin crust, but if you got extra dough, you can always make breadsticks. You could make a couple little flatbreads, throwing them in the oven. They're nice for the next day to dip into something.
So let me ask you a question. How does this dough differ from the other dough?
What other dough?
So you took the dough that you had from this morning and you just added to it?
Yeah, that was our starter. So that starter is what we started with here.
Okay.
Sorry if that wasn't clear.
Yeah, because I saw everything in the bowl and I wasn't sure.
Yeah,
You
what
guys-
we put in the bowl this morning, was, remember, water, about a cup and a quarter, cup and a third, whole wheat flour, yeast, wheat bran, wheat germ, and we let that rise. So what we came in here this afternoon, we took that same bowl with the same ingredients in it, and we just added to it. And that's how this is going to rise. It's from that yeast that we put in there this morning. That makes sense?
Yeah. Yes.
And I like making bread because you feel the dough change. You feel all of a sudden, you feel that gluten develop in there, and all of a sudden you're feeling the dough push back a little bit against your pressure, and it's just kind of a feeling you get pulling the flour out there. Okay, it needs a little more. Okay, lay off it. And
So it's got to be quite different when you're doing gluten-free for, people that have those specific diets.
say that again.
Yeah, I got my fan running extra high. I don't know why, but if you're doing gluten-free, it's got to be quite different, when you're making it for those folks.
Oh yeah. We're trying to get the gluten formed in this dough. Obviously, if you were a gluten-free person, we wouldn't even be going down this road. I haven't tried it, but I heard there's some pretty good, what they call a cauliflower crust. I haven't tried it, but I heard that's pretty good. Or just some real low gluten flours, maybe, like I said, corn. I guess you could make cornmeal crust because that doesn't have much gluten in it. Yeah, and one time I shouldn't say one time, several times where I didn't have the time on a Saturday or Sunday to make a crust, I went and bought it at a local pizzeria, raw crust. I got it like this, and it's amazing what they add a lot of gluten, bread modifiers, all kinds of commercially graded stuff. And it's just crazy. The dough has got so much gluten. It's like working with a spring. It's like, goes back and forth. And my dough isn't going to be like a commercial pizzeria dough because we're not adding all those dough modifiers and gluten modifiers. And my personal opinion is that's why we have people with gluten intolerances, because we've overdone gluten in our country. So,
yeah.
All right. So I'm looking at the clock. What time did I say I started kneading this? About 4:06.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember? I didn't.
Yeah,
write it.
it's about 4:06.
Not saying it's got to be 10 minutes exactly, but it's just a good reference point. I'm feeling it coming together here. Okay. So we used about a little less than a cup and a half to do this. Some people, when they're talking about dough, they talk about a window pane test. They want to see if they can take a little piece of dough and stretch it to get thin, like you could see through it like a window pane. And this is still a little wet, so we're going to work it a little longer. But that stretchability where it stays together in strands and not just break apart, you know, kind of the difference between like a pie crust or cornbread as opposed to a yeasted bread, like, you know, a good loaf of bread, where you've got that, it stretches and stays together. You don't usually see that in non-yeasted, low, shall we say, low gluten or no gluten products.
Mhm.
But this has got a good feel. Another thing you can see is when you push into it, it kind of comes back.
Wow, okay.
If the dough was need, you know, we could probably knead this a few more minutes. I think what I might do is just sprinkle out a little more flour and work it a little more aggressively to work that in there. Okay, and then towards the end, what I do is I kind of, if you see what I'm doing, I'm kind of tucking it underneath and making a nice smooth ball like that. Stand by. I'm over here rinsing out the bowl. Getting little bits of dough on the side removed. All right, so what we're going to do now, I'm drying out my bowl. Don't want any moisture in there. And then I'm going to put a little olive oil in there.
That's a good ceramic bowl.
What's that?
Sounds like a good ceramic bowl.
Yeah. All right. So I've got that in there. I'm going to put just a little bit of oil on my hand to put on the top. And that's, so we see the size there. I'm going to put my cloth back over it, set it in a draft-free warm place. And if you want, we can get back together in a couple hours, look at it, and it'll be ready to go into the oven.
I love that. You bet. Capturing it all.
So, are you interested in talking later when I do that?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to clean up my mess here.
Okay, Gary. So I'll send you, I think it, yeah, just click on whatever invite that I send you and what time you want me to call you.
It's 4:20. Why don't we make it 6:20?
Got it. 2 hours from now.
Or is that
Yeah.
past bedtime?
No.
Okay, so that concludes part 2. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
No, it looks good. And I'm going to put together my shopping list.
Okay.
I've got to get some yeast and all that. In fact, yeah, especially with COVID-19 and all that, I'll probably have to get it from Amazon. But, I'm going to be looking at that, and I'll probably have some questions for you. So I'll
And this tool that I talked about, these are handy for cleaning up your work surface. You can scrape it like that. Clean that up.
great. Never captured it. I'm more of a visual learner, so this has been very helpful.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see you
A
at
little bit less.
6:20.
Very good. Thank you.